Hey guys, what is up? Kid here of Burn 1 Shadowverse Evolved channel, as always bringing you another deck profile, this time on 2 Cost Abyss. This was a very popular deck in Japan during this meta, has a lot of key cards that are incredibly strong and can kind of dismantle your opponent depending on your draws if they don't get their stuff online before you start ripping their hand apart. So here's the deck itself. This is the version I've been tinkering with, and this is kind of, I feel like, almost the standard build. There are some minor things I've added in here myself that I kind of liked for this aggressive deck itself. One of the big things about it, though, I think this is kind of the shell you want to be looking at if you plan to play Omen of Silence. I know some people play it, some people don't. I think, well, in generally, most people believe the deck version with Omen of Silence is more, I don't want to say consistent, but just stronger, just because you get to pull apart your opponent's hand, hopefully dismantling their ability to get their combo off. It's very good into the new Force deck Puppets as well, because you can pull away their Anastasia from their hand or any of their key drops they need for that turn. It's pretty devastating and can just kind of take control of the game because you've made them discard 2 to 3 times before they made it to like turn 6. So let's just get into this deck itself here. So Demonium Punk Devil, this is just like a staple that's going to be coming in and out constantly. It's just a very well statted 2 cost 2/3 that also heals you 2, but also gains Bane if you go ahead and subtract 2 of your own health. It's just a really solid card. If you've been playing Abyss, you know this is just a 3-of that you always have in the back of your pocket. Hell's Unleasher. This is a set 1 card that saw almost no play at all, but now due to Alterplane Arbiter, it becomes more of a real card in this deck. Not only is it a 2 cost card because the entire deck revolves around Crimson Rose Queen and like seeing multiple 2 cost cards in your hand, but this also recycles some of your big hitters that might get milled by Alterplane Arbiter when you get into like turn 5 and turn 6, when you're playing that down to clear the board. So you actually get a lot of use out of this card, surprisingly, as well. It's mostly there used to recycle a card back into your hand from the grave. Usually, like I said, Rose Queen, Crimson Rose Queen, that is a lot of times the card you'd be looking for. Other than that, it's just a solid 2 cost card. Maisha is the version I'm playing has Maisha in it. I like this a lot. I do play Purgation's Blade as a 1-of. Yes, it is not a 2 cost card, but it is only a 1-of for the deck. A lot of the times I felt like once you get into the late game, and if Rose Queen wasn't enough to actually close out the game for you, Maisha came in clutch. Also, the fact that we are playing Surefire Bullet, which is such a strong card itself, is very good for us because it lets Maisha be 2 removal, basically. It 2-for-1s essentially, because once we do the strike effect, we get to go ahead and play Surefire Bullet to remove something while also running into something else if needed to. And we do play 2 of the Evo, so we can Evo 1 for that tempo advantage and still have another Evo late game to go ahead and play the full 9 play points to go ahead and mill 5 cards from our deck, and then be able to hopefully use Purgation's Blade to go ahead and bump this up with so many flowers in our grave to close out games when we need to push like 10 or more damage in 1 turn. Surprisingly, it's been a very powerful card. I'm not exactly sure if every version of the deck will be playing Maisha. It just felt very strong in my opinion, and like an alternate win con once Rose Queen, Crimson Rose Queen that is not enough to actually win you the game. Though a lot of times once Crimson Rose Queen starts hitting the board over and over again, it gets really hard for your opponent to win. Voela, I think that's how you say this name. One-Wing Demon. This card's really powerful. So one of the big things that you'll notice while playing this deck is that your odd play point turns are kind of awkward because you're always like floating 1 play point, which is not very cost efficient for the deck. So there's turns like on turn 5 and turn 3 that just feel bad when you don't plan to like drop Alterplane Arbiter, or even on turn 3 you just kind of only have 1 2 cost play. This kind of fixes that while also generating advantage for us, because we can spend that extra play point to reveal the top card of our deck, and if it's 2 cost card, which majority of the deck is, we get to put it into our EX area and we can play it that same turn. So on turn 3, we can get 4 play points worth of stuff onto the board. And then our turn 4, same thing as well. Suddenly we still get 2 things on that turn. That way we can provide some tempo advantage that way, and some value for the fact that all the odd numbered play point turns are the ones where we can't maximize our play point usage, which is really important for the deck. And just having the extra hand advantage feels really good in the sense that we get to pull extra cards out and we don't have to waste too many cards in our hand, because we do want a pretty big hand once we get into the Rose Queen turns, the Crimson Rose Queen's turns, that is. Zealot of Lust was a very interesting card. Stat-wise, it being aggressive 3-2 is all right, though I kind of prefer if it was swapped to a 2-3, being a little harder to remove. But what's really nice about this card is that you can go ahead and subtract your own health to be able to ping things on the board, so you can have some board control that way. So if your opponent doesn't let you interact with things because they choose not to engage them, essentially, you can start removing things that way. And a lot of times too, this also helps, you know, clearing the last bit of health you need to remove from some bigger followers, things like that, which is very nice. And on top of that, Punk Demon and Zealot of Lust here both help us with our next card here, which is Kiss of Lust. This heals you too, so if we ever do take 1 damage, then we can always go up health essentially. Otherwise, even with Punk Demon, this will neutralize the -2 that we take, and then if Sanguine's activated for us, which it will be, we get to draw 2 instead of 1. Even playing this as just a 2 cost isn't the worst in the world. Getting a heal 2 and a draw 1 is fine. Card is one of the other ways we gain advantage while keeping the theme of 2 cost Abyss essentially going. So this is another tool for us to generally get hand size up and hopefully keep a really big hand for our Crimson Rose Queen turns. I personally play 2 Razor Claws. I like this card a lot in this deck. I feel like this deck is a little bit more aggressive, especially once you get into the Rose Queen turns to like do burn damage to your opponent. So having this there feels really good. On top of, there are turns too where like on turn 4, I just feel like I'm better off going Razor Claw face into Kiss of Lust. That way I neutralize the damage I take from Razor Claw while also being able to push damage and then draw 2 new cards with that combination. It just adds extra reach for the deck that I like a lot, and the fact that Razor Claw is kind of like can be a control tool or an aggressive tool feels really good. So there are games where if for some reason your opponent doesn't really do anything the first like 4 turns of the game, you start swinging with bodies. A lot of times like Razor Claw becomes more of a lethal line later in the game, especially when Crimson Rose Queen is out on the board. You get to basically do 5 damage to your opponent for 2 play points, which is crazy. Sonata of Silence is a new card added to this set, and this is like the big reason you would be playing Rule 9 Omen of Silence, because this basically lets you recycle Rule 9 Omen of Silence. So not only do you get Rule 9 out earlier in the game to force discards after evoing, once you get into the later games, you can cycle a Rule 9 back into the board when you have 10 Necrocharge 2. This will make your opponent discard a card, along with Rule 9 coming in and removing something off the board with its own Necrocharge 10 effect as well. So this card goes insane in the later turns of the game a lot of the times, or if you just want to get Rule 9 out once again, even if you don't have the Necrocharge 10, to be able to evo and force them to discard that way too, that's completely fine as well. Once again too, it is a 2-cost card, which helps a lot with the deck recovering its play points once we get into the Crimson Rose Queen turn. Surefire Bullet, good removal. I don't think there's anything else I need to really say. Thundering Roar is a combination removal and hand destruction, essentially. So if you've played with Rule 9 before, you know how powerful this card can be. The fact that it has 2 relevant modes, along with the fact that in the later turns of the game, this forces a discard and can usually deal 3 damage to something, which acts as removal as well. It's just a really solid removal tool and control tool in general. You'll probably be playing with this card for quite some time, and the fact that we're playing Rule 9 only makes this card that much better, and it's 2 costs. Like, what can you say? There's a lot of games where you kind of especially going second, you're like, turn 2 Thundering Roar, turn 3 Rule 9 Evo, turn 4 another Thundering Roar plus whatever. It just destroys your opponent's hand. So if you get those high roll hand destruction games where now your opponent's turns 5 and 6 are very, very weak because they have just no cards in hand essentially, and they have limited options to work with, just makes the value of running these hand disruptions very, very strong. Whisper of a Dream, I mean, we kind of know this card is just a really, really powerful card in general. It hoses Ancient Elf, if you run into anyone playing Ancient Elf still. It hoses a lot of things that people aren't ready for, and it's just a very good removal tool. What can I say? That's all you really need to do. It does mill a card off the top of your deck, which can hurt sometimes, but the fact that we do have ways to recur things from the grave isn't the worst. It gets us to Necrocharge faster as well, which isn't too bad. But yeah, it's just a solid removal piece. What's there to really say? Rule Nigh is just a really powerful card. It does EVA for 1, 3/3. It forces your opponent's spells to cost 1 more. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of a lot of spells to be really worried about. In the mirror match, this card is a little bit more dead than live, I guess, in some cases. But it's still a really powerful card that can create awkward turns for your opponents because of the added play point they'll have to spend on some of their spells. Negro Charge 10 comes up, but it doesn't come up too often that it matters. But the big thing we're working with here is we do play 3 Rule Nigh Evos because we're here for the random discard. And the fact this is a 4/4 body on the board is just good. And, you know, we still get the whole cost 1 more play point thing for spells, which can be devastating, like I said. We want to maximize this because we have so many ways to recur Rule Nigh now. Having the 3 Evos just feels good because you'll be able to use them basically all game, or all 3 in one game quite readily, basically. Purgation's Blade, I talked about this earlier. It's the one of, it comes up occasionally where you just need to remove some big thing out of the way. Otherwise, this is kind of a card you just hope to kind of mill or use, you know, like on one of those odd number turns, play point turns, just to like kind of maximize the value there. Otherwise, you kind of don't really want to draw this. You want to mill it through the Amisha's effect, not Mistelina, hopefully, or I guess off a Alterplane Arbiter if that happens as well. Though ideally you a lot of times want to be milling 2-cost cards. So Alterplane Arbiter is kind of our board control tool. This is kind of like the oh crap emergency button that also generates huge hand advantage for us. So a lot of times if you play this on 5, it's probably not going to live past that. But a lot of the times you're kind of using this card to recur a lot of hand because this does get you 3 cards from your grave back into your hand. So the first effect, Fanfare, you declare any number. And so in this deck, obviously the number is 2. You want to be declaring 2 all the time. You bury the top 5 cards of your deck, and then you deal X damage to each enemy far on the field, where X equals the number of cards buried with the cost you declared. So ideally, this card usually hits between 3 and 5 a lot of the times is what I see when this comes to the board. Those cases where you do have to mill 5 2 costs it's kind of scary sometimes playing this card. You just gotta, you know, sometimes you gotta leave your life open to the casino, and whether you hit the 5 or not is kind of the part that sucks with this deck. But ideally it comes down, it kind of clears the boards or removes most of the board pieces. But the next part, we play 2 of the Evo, which is nice. It becomes a 6/6, which isn't the big deal. The big deal is on Evolve, we can select 3 cards with different names in our cemetery. And then if all those cards cost the same amount, in this case 2, obviously, we can add all those cards to hand. This is the way we keep gas going into the later game if we're forced to play a longer game and we need to get more 2 costs to hand before playing Crimson Rose Queen, or even just cycling like Razor Claws and Kiss of Lust and stuff like that. It's just a very solid card all around. That also helps with us the fact that we do mill so many cards off the top of our deck. We don't feel as bad when we mill a bunch of good 2-cost cards because we know we can get it back later. Finally, the piece of resistance essentially is Crimson Rose Queen. This is how you will win most of your games. So she comes down for 6 Evos for 2 when she does come into play. You know, like the Forestcraft Rose Queen, it does generate a Thorn Burst, but only 1 into your Ixera, which is nice because on the Evo side, on Evolve, you reveal your hand and you recover play points equal to the number of 2-cost cards revealed this way. So ideally, you want to have like 6-ish cards in your hand if you could get away with that when Crimson Rose Queen comes down. That doesn't happen too often, but if it does, it feels pretty good. But ideally, you want like 4 to 5 a lot of the times when this comes down to recover those play points, because then whenever you play a card that originally costs 2, you can choose one of the following: deal 2 damage to each enemy far on the field, then give your leader +2 health, or deal 2 damage to the enemy leader. So a lot of times Crimson Rose Queen will come down, you hopefully recover 6, so you can play 3 other spells that turn, or 3 other 2-cost cards, so you can either clear your opponent's board while healing up a lot, or start doing face damage with it, because with the with the, what is it called, Thorn Burst, you'll be able to do 3 damage to the face and draw a card essentially, and then, you know, an extra 2 damage to the face, making it 5. So if you have another Razor Claw in hand, like this is the part that I like so much about playing Razor Claw on this list, is that when you make it to the Crimson Rose Queen turn, and if you get like the high rule of 6 play points, or even 4 play points back, you already have 1 card that generates you 3 face damage, or I guess 3 removal somewhere if needed. But ideally it's face damage along with the 2 damage from this being 5. So if you have a second way to do damage, which in this case Razor Claw, that's another 5 face damage. So if your opponent's at 10 or less, you can just have those 2 spells in hand, or just 1 Razor Claw in hand, to close the game out that way, because it does generate play points back on the turn you pop off with this card, and hopefully 10 damage to face is enough to close games out. That's the big thing about this deck, is you don't want to waste your Razor Claws when, if possible, because of the extra push of damage you get from Crimson Rose Queen being out, Razor Claw, and the Thorn Burst itself. This is kind of how the deck closes all the games. We want to get to the point where our opponent's kind of hovering around 10 or less life. That way, when we get to this turn, we could just go Crimson Rose Queen, 2 cards, and the game's over, because they can't interact with us because there's no quick timing when we cast spells, which is great for this deck. And like I said, we do play 3 Crimson Rose Queen. This is like quote unquote our boss monster, and you want to slam this to the board as often as possible a lot of the times, especially when you have that fat hand and you're able to recover 4 to 6 play points. That's like the ideal you want out of this card for maximum value, especially when you play a Razor Claw. That's the deck itself. Personally, this deck is very weird. It's like a mid-range aggro deck, I would say, leaning more towards the aggro, just because you do end up playing some very high value, like turn 5, turn 6 cards essentially, but you also get to push things onto the board, get more value out of your One-Winged Demon as well when possible, being able to push things forward. But what makes this kind of like the mid-range aggro, in my opinion, is that we have some control tools in Rulnai and Threatening Roar, just be able to like slow our opponent down. But the fact is, we still get to have that big burst damage with Razor Claw and Crimson Rose Queen being able to close game out for us. So we get this transition of early aggression in a sense, where we can try to swing in with our little guys for a bit and getting Rulnai out, destroy their hand, into our quote unquote combo turn, usually on turn 7 or 8, depending on if you have the Evo points or not, to kind of pop off from there. A lot of the times though, like I said, you get to use Alterchaotic Arbiter to go ahead and refill your hand before you go into the Crimson Rose Queen turn, just so you can maximize the value you get from that turn. Because a lot of the times, if you have 2 Razor Claws in your hand, and you recover 6 play points, you got to do 15 damage to your opponent's face, which is insane with Rose Queen, Crimson Rose Queen, just to kind of close out those games. So if you do end up playing that slower mid-range game where you're just kind of playing more control, removal, discarding your opponent, you do have essentially a chance to do like 15 burst damage out of your hand with Rose Queen. It's very important to not waste Razor Claws when possible, and obviously Alterchaotic Arbiter is a really great card to get Razor Claw back. That way you can hold one in hand, get another one back from the grave to kind of guarantee getting that 15 burn damage off of your Crimson Rose Queen, which is the scary part. There are games, like I said, I really do like the Maisha package in this, even though it kind of technically hurts it by adding 1 3-cost card in Purgation's Blade to the deck, but I like having it as an alternate win con, because sometimes Crimson Rose Queen is not enough. People have answers to it sometimes. Maybe you don't have enough burst damage. Maybe your opponent's been healing a lot this game. You just don't have a way to really close it out without having a really, really big swing. Maybe your hand size is really low because of you're playing against another control matchup, or even in the mirror, and your opponent's forcing discards at your hand. So your Rose Queen turn isn't as good into their turns. So Maisha itself kind of fixes those issues, in my opinion, while also providing extra reassurance with being able to recast Surefire Bullet from our grave. But yeah, so that's the deck itself. Hopefully this kind of gives you an insight into this deck. It's an incredibly popular deck in Japan. I don't know really how popular it's going to be here in North America, but we only have like a couple BCSs left for the English side of the event. So I guess once the stats come out from Toronto, we'll kind of have a better idea of how many Abyss kind of showed up there. Though, spoiler alerts, top 4 at Toronto was 4 Puppet decks, which I think is not really a surprise to anyone. It's a very strong, powerful deck. And then I think if you looked at this deck, or like the stats from Japan during this meta, this is technically the 2nd most played deck and the 2nd most winning lists running around, or this strategy at least is. So you should at least keep in mind about this deck and what it can do, because a lot of times people don't see that 15 burst damage coming when you do get a high roll into like the double Razor Claw Thorn Burst turns with Rose Queen. But yeah, with that being said, hopefully you guys like this deck profile. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It does keep me motivated. I know it's been a bit since I've been pushing videos out, but I'm getting back into the swing of things here. So you should be seeing a slurry of new content coming out over the next couple weeks. With that being said, guys, I hope to see you guys in the next video. Later, everyone.